here's the dealio. So blood vessels, again, I know you didn't get a lot of quality time with the models, but hopefully if you review this video review that I do and other stuff, it'll help. So first it says, know the fetal circulation and the 5 changes in circulation that occur after birth. Remember, there are organs that the fetus is not using yet, so you've got blood vessel changes to basically bypass those organs that aren't being used. After you're born, you're going to use those organs, so then you've got to adapt a different circulation to deal with that. So I'll first talk about the arteries, and I'll go through the model here, and I'll show you all these different arteries that are up there. Then we will go on and do the veins. Now remember, there are more veins than there are arteries because of your extremities. In your upper and lower extremities, there are a deep set of veins and a superficial set of veins. Whereas you only really have a deep set of arteries. You don't have a superficial set of arteries. So you got more veins than you have arteries. One thing that's weird about these models, unfortunately, is that these models only show the superficial veins. They don't show the deep veins. But I will show you some pictures from your textbook that do show the deep veins. The deep veins are really not that difficult. They have the exact same names as the arteries do, and they sit right next to the arteries. So if you're ever wondering, it's just the same names as the arteries. It's the superficial veins that are kind of weird because they have these weird names. They don't match up with any arteries, etc. So these are the deep veins of the arm up here. I'll show you a picture, but they're not on those models. These are the deep veins of the lower extremity. I'll show you pictures, but they're not on the models. Then after that, I will segue into the microscope slide. There's really not a lot of microscope slides to look at here, and that's good news. It's really just being able to tell an artery or a vein under the microscope. And then also, you do have to be able to identify like the 3 layers, the tunica interna, the tunica media, and the tunica externa. All right, so first, the fetal changes, just to go through this, there's 5 of them. So remember, the blood vessel that brings fresh oxygenated blood into the fetus from the placenta is the umbilical vein. It's red because it's carrying oxygenated blood, but it's a vein because it's going toward the fetal heart. After birth, it's going to close off, and its name's going to change. It's going to be called the ligamentum teres. It also goes by the name round ligament after it closes off, so you could use either name, ligamentum teres or round ligament. Either one's fine. After that, the blood is going to go through another bypass route called the ductus venosus. Now, we didn't really talk about this before, but besides the lungs, the fetus is also not really using its liver. Okay, the liver is an important organ for detoxifying foods that you've eaten that have gone through your digestive tract. The fetus isn't using its digestive tract, so the need for the liver to do those kind of things is not really that great. Okay, the mom's system should already be her liver should already be kind of detoxifying things, etc., for the fetus. So you want to bypass the liver, and you do using this thing called the ductus venosus. After birth, of course, you don't want to bypass the liver, so this is going to fill in and become the ligamentum venosum. Then you follow the blood up, and it goes to the right side of the heart, the right atrium. And there are 2 bypass routes that allow you to bypass the lungs. First of all, there's the foramen ovale, which is a hole in the interatrial septum. So blood can pass from the right atrium straight through into the left atrium through the foramen ovale. After you're born, that closes, or at least it should close, and it becomes known as the fossa ovalis after it closes. Another way to bypass the lungs is up here, connecting the pulmonary trunk to the arch of the aorta. That's called the ductus arteriosus. After it closes off, it becomes the ligamentum arteriosum. Okay? And then the last thing, the thing that brings the deoxygenated blood away from the fetal heart and back to the placenta, are the umbilical arteries. After birth, they close off and they become the medial umbilical ligaments. Okay? So make sure you know those 5 changes. Make sure you know what they represent. Okay? There definitely will be, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 questions at least on the next lab practical about this stuff, so make sure you know it. All right, now I'm going to go, instead of using this picture up here, I'm going to go through the actual model because I found that the resolution on these pictures just wasn't that good, so let me do that.
What? You could get you like a laser pointer or something.
I know.
Like a cat toy.
Something's cool that I can work this on. All right. That's pretty good. Let me just go a little bit more.
It's
Dark.
It's like, now it's too bright.
All right. So let me do the arteries first. So this is the ascending aorta, then that's the arch of the aorta, and then it's going to go down, and then it's called the descending aorta when it goes down. Now you can't see most of the descending aorta in the thoracic cavity because it's behind the heart and the other things. If you did look at it, you could call it the descending aorta, or if you want to be more specific, you can call it the thoracic aorta. It's going to go through an opening in the diaphragm, and then it's known as the abdominal aorta. So down here, you've got the abdominal aorta, and we'll go more into that in a second. While we're talking about arteries, don't forget that these are also arteries, even though they're blue, those are the pulmonary arteries. So this is the pulmonary trunk, and then that's the left pulmonary artery, and then going over there would be the right pulmonary artery. The first branch, what are the first branches off of the aorta? What are the very first branches off of the aorta?
Right.
Thank you, the right and left coronary. Now, you can't see them so well. Actually, I'll take that back. You can, that's supposed to be the right coronary artery there, the left one someplace over there. They're really hard to see. They're technically the first branch. The first big branch, though, that's easier to see, although it's kind of behind the vein, would be this big guy here, and that's going to be the brachiocephalic artery, okay? After the brachiocephalic artery, actually, let me go a little closer. Okay, so right back here would be the brachiocephalic artery. See a little bit of it. Next big branch is the left common carotid artery, and then the third one is the left subclavian artery. There's a little bit of asymmetry here in that the common carotid and the subclavian on the left side come directly off of the arch of the aorta, whereas on the right side, you have this brachiocephalic artery, and then this is the brachiocephalic. Then you have the common carotid here, and you have the subclavian going over there, okay? So let me follow this around. Now on this model, the head is turned to the left, but you'd basically have the same pattern so this is the common carotid artery. Right here is roughly where you'd have the carotid sinus, and that's where you'd have some of those baroreceptors. You've got one branch that kind of goes lateral. So if you look at your common carotid, it's going up and then it branches. One branch goes out lateral, and that's this branch that's going up there, and that is the external. This branch going up here, that's the external carotid artery, and it's going to supply blood to like the skin of your face, the muscles of your face, that sort of thing. The much more important branch, and it's a little harder to see, is this branch that goes medial, and that's the internal carotid artery, and that's the one that's going to go up inside of your skull and go to your brain. Okay. If you come back down here, this guy back here is the subclavian artery, and then this guy going up here is the vertebral artery. Now, I'm going to go over to this side just because it's a little easier to follow it out, and because this left hand is actually in the anatomical position, whereas the right hand is actually turned. Okay, so as you're coming out here, this is still the subclavian artery. But as you go into the armpit area around in here, the name changes. And there are some muscles that are actually the boundaries, so you know when to name it when, but none of our models or pictures show those muscles, so I'm not even going to bother telling you about that. I'll just say that, if I want to ask you about the subclavian artery, I'll usually point like well up here, and if I want to ask you about the axillary artery, I'll really point like more back here. So the name changes. Same blood vessel, it just goes from being the subclavian artery to being the axillary artery. But don't get too close to that name, or too used to that name, because as it continues, the name changes again. So by the time you're down here, it's called the brachial artery. Okay? Now, the brachial artery is going to divide into two main branches. The one that goes over here, that stays lateral, is the radial artery. And the one that goes here and goes medial, that's the ulnar artery. Okay? What else was I going to say about that? So that's pretty much it for those arteries. Now let me go to the abdomen. Yeah. Okay. So again, this is the abdominal aorta. This big thing here is like it's actually a big trunk that they call the celiac trunk. And coming off of it are three arteries. There's this artery that's going over to this organ, that's the splenic artery, and that's the spleen, obviously, right? There's this branch that's going over to the liver, that's the hepatic artery. And then there's this branch that's kind of coming out towards you, and that's the gastric artery.
We don't have that in the bullets. Is that?
What?
I'm just saying. Don't hold it against us.
Hold on a second.
I'll follow the line.
Wait.
We have mesenteric, superior,
No,
inferior.
yeah. It says gastric, splenic, and superior mesenteric.
You see it? Hold
Yeah.
on.
It's just grouped in with two others for some reason.
You got them all. That's okay.
Branches of hepatic portal vein.
Oh, that's the vein. Okay. No, you're right. The gastric artery isn't listed here. Darn it.
Yeah.
This class is so much easier than it used to be. Ugh. All right. I can't ask you about it. Good call, Jess. You just saved everyone. All right. Anyway, as you go below the celiac trunk, you've got this big branch here. This is the superior mesenteric artery. Actually, let me back up on this picture a little bit. Sorry. So, this branch here is the superior mesenteric artery. Now, just below the superior mesenteric artery, you can't see it because the vein is in the way. But behind this vein here and behind the inferior vena cava here, you actually have your right and left renal arteries that go to your kidneys. Okay? They're just behind the veins. As you continue downward, you've got these two little branches here. Those are the gonadal arteries. You do not have to worry about those. There's two of them. But as you go down a little further from there, there's one artery coming off the middle, and that's the inferior mesenteric artery. Okay? So celiac trunk, superior mesenteric artery, and then the inferior mesenteric artery that's going down there. As you continue along, the abdominal aorta is going to split, and then it becomes the common iliac arteries. Okay, left and right common iliac arteries. They don't go very far before they split off, and they kind of follow the same naming pattern that the carotids did. There's going to be a branch that goes medial, and that's going to be the internal iliac artery. And then there's going to be a bigger branch that stays lateral, and that's going to be the external iliac artery. Now don't get too used to the name external iliac artery, because as it passes over the edge of your hip bone, the name changes, and now from here it's called the femoral artery. Okay? Now if I back up, and I'm gonna use the right side, or excuse me, the left side, because they're showing it a little bit better. This is still the femoral artery as it goes down here. Now, there is a deep branch that comes here that you don't have to worry about. But this is the femoral artery coming down here. As it goes behind the knee, it changes names. It's called the popliteal artery at that point. After it goes behind the knee, it gives off two main branches. The one that goes forward, actually, let me show the whole foot. The one that goes forward, that's the anterior tibial artery. And then the one that stays in the back is the posterior tibial artery. Okay? So those are the arteries. Now let me go back and do the veins. Start in the same place. So, there's the superior vena cava. Down there, it's hard to see, but that would be the start of the inferior vena cava down there. Don't forget that these four guys, those are the pulmonary veins. Even though they're red, they're the pulmonary veins, right? If you follow the superior mesenteric vein up, you've got this branch here, and then this little short branch here. Those are the brachiocephalic veins. So there's a left and right brachiocephalic vein, but there's only one brachiocephalic artery. It's a little weird. After the brachiocephalics, you then get into the internal and external jugular veins. As the vein continues, then it becomes the subclavian vein, and it kind of follows that same pattern as before, where it's going to change names and keep doing all that crazy stuff that the arteries did. So, like at this point, up at the top, it'd be the subclavian vein. But as it goes further, it's going to change to the axillary vein. And then, this is where the model doesn't show it. Notice there's a little thing that looks like it's cut off right there. That would be the continuation. That would be the brachial vein. And it'd be running right next to the brachial artery. And then right when it got down in here, there'd be a branch of the vein that went over here, and that would be the radial vein. And then there'd be a branch that goes over here, and that would be the ulnar vein. Okay? What this model, though, is showing you, it's showing you the superficial veins of the arm. And this vein here is called the cephalic vein. This vein here that stays kind of medial is the basilic vein. And then this one that cuts across in the front of the elbow, which is a popular spot for like blood draws or IVs, that's the median cubital vein. Okay. Let me see if I can show you the picture from your textbook that shows the deep veins, just so you don't feel like you're getting gypped. Hold on. So these are the deep veins. Notice they have the identical names to the arteries. The brachial vein comes down, it divides into a radial vein and into an ulnar vein. Okay? So like on this diagram, the things that are in darker blue are the deep veins. The things that are in light blue are the superficial veins. So in this particular diagram, like this would be the cephalic vein here. This would be like the basilic vein. And then like the guy cutting across there would be the median cubital vein. All right, back to this. All right, let me go through the abdomen now. Go a little closer. And, okay. So, here's the inferior vena cava. The first branch that's coming off here is the hepatic vein. That is the main vein, it's really the only vein, that drains blood out of the liver. So blood leaving the liver goes through this hepatic vein and gets dumped into the inferior vena cava. The next veins you have are these two guys, which are the renal veins. Again, there are renal arteries, you just can't see them because they're behind the renal veins. Then as you continue down, again, this is more inferior vena cava, but then the names basically stay the same. You've got the common iliac vein. There'll be a branch that goes medial called the internal iliac vein. There'll be a branch a bigger branch that stays lateral. That'll be the external iliac vein. And then when it crosses over the edge of the hip bone, it'll become the femoral vein. Okay. Now, one other special set of veins that I skipped over for a moment are these guys in purple. Those are veins also. These are part of the hepatic portal system. The hepatic portal system is the most famous portal system. I know we talked about the hypophyseal portal system first, but when somebody just says portal system, they're usually referring to the hepatic portal system. And that's the guys shown in purple. So let me tell you what they are. These are going to basically have names that match up with the arteries that you already learned. So this guy going up here, that's going to be the gastric vein. It's going up to where the stomach is. This guy that follows along with the artery, that's the splenic vein. This guy here that follows that artery, that's the superior mesenteric vein. And then this guy here that follows that artery is the inferior mesenteric vein. All of them kind of come together and they form this big vein here that goes into the liver called the hepatic portal vein. So if you're keeping score on the liver, there are two ways that blood gets into the liver. One is through the hepatic artery in red, and the other is through the hepatic portal vein that's in purple. That's how blood gets into the liver. There's one way that blood gets out of the liver, and that's using the hepatic vein. Okay? Notice this guy and that guy, they have very similar names. This is the hepatic portal vein. This is just the hepatic vein. Make sure you don't screw that up, okay? You're like, I wasn't even thinking about screwing it up, but now I am. All right, good. Let me keep going on the way down here. And in this case, they just completely cut off the deep veins, but I'll show you a picture of it. So essentially, you'd have a femoral vein here. The femoral vein will follow the femoral artery. The femoral vein will divide and give off a anterior tibial vein and a posterior tibial vein, but they're not showing it on this model. By the way, I think they chose not to show the deep veins on this just because maybe it was too busy and they didn't want to clog it up with a lot of information. That's my guess. I don't really know. But you do see the superficial veins. This guy here, this big long one that goes on the medial part of your leg, it's pretty famous. That's called the great saphenous vein. That's one of the veins that they typically use when they're doing cardiac bypass surgery, okay, when somebody has a blockage. And then this little guy down here on the side, that's the small saphenous or the short saphenous vein. That's another superficial vein. All right, let me show you a picture of the actual deep veins so you believe me. So this is the picture of the deep veins. Here is that's the anterior view, there's the posterior view. Again, they just have the same names that the arteries do. So the femoral vein, as it goes behind the knee, is called the popliteal vein, and then it basically gives off those two branches, the anterior tibial vein and the posterior tibial vein, just like the artery does. Next, blood vessel slides. So here's a microscope slide of the blood vessels, and you have to be able to tell the different types of blood vessels apart, and you have to be able to see the three layers. So first of all, any guess, is this the artery or is this the vein?
Artery.
Yeah, that's the artery. It has a thicker wall. This is the vein. It has a thinner wall. The other thing too, I think I said it in class, but arteries, because they have a thicker wall, they'll usually hold their shape better when you cut them to make a slide. So arteries will usually stay more or less like round or maybe a little bit ovalish. Veins oftentimes will kind of collapse when you cut them to make microscope. Now that vein's actually pretty open, but a lot of times you'll just see it look sort of collapsed, okay? You can see the three layers in both. So the innermost layer, which is basically just like a single cell layer thick, that would be the endothelium, or that would be the tunica interna, which is made up of the endothelium. So tunica interna, it's also called the tunica intima. You could use either name. So there it is there, that thin layer that's basically there, that would be the tunica interna. The next layer that's kind of staining darker pink, that's the tunica media. That's where you find all of the smooth muscle. And then the last layer that's kind of light pink, that's the tunica externa, and that would be where you'd find the collagen fibers, elastic fibers, etc. Okay, so you see all of them. These guys here you don't have to worry about, but those are nerves that have been cut. Okay, nerves, arteries, and veins, they tend to run together in the body, so it's not surprising that you see them all on the same slide. Here's another one. Again, which blood vessel do you suppose this is?
Vein.
That's the vein. This is the artery. You can see the thinner wall. Again, tunica interna, tunica interna, tunica media, and then tunica externa there, tunica externa there. And once again, there's some more nerves that are traveling there as well. All right, that is it. Any questions about any of that stuff? Lots. I'm sorry you didn't get to really look at the models yourselves, but hopefully we'll maybe carve out some time next